We're going to get back into session. A couple of things. Governors, heads up. You all should have the conflict paperwork in front of you. Some of you have already completed that. If you have not completed that, critical that it's completed and signed off on before the end of this meeting. The only thing that can get you immediately removed as a governor for is failing to sign that by the end of this meeting, okay? And that is in the bylaws somewhere. All right. So please, and Margaret reminded me, she needs that. Anything? Yes, please, to Margaret, so that we don't have to chase people down in the parking lot. The other thing is, Kim, if you will allow me, I do want to make one more appointment for you, and that is to put you in charge of being the liaison duties to the ice cream parlor from this meeting forward for all time, because I would not have known there were ice cream sandwiches but for your announcement. So that is your new liaison. Beautiful. All right, next on the agenda then we've got, excuse me, where is Nagowski? All right. Take it away. This is the update.
Yep.
Sorry, it's not a proposal regarding updates and board communications. Sarah.
So this is just another step forward. We're walking ourselves forward, and I know we've got some time to make up, so you can do with this what you will. It's not for action. It's the first reading. As you know, we have been kind of grappling with a lot of these concerns about how board members best communicate and get in touch with their members. And last meeting, we talked about a lot of options. Everyone presented a lot of options, which I thought were good options. I took those back and I kind of fleshed them out, which means this is what it would actually look like to have some of these options in place and put together draft language. And I want to emphasize, it's not the end language, it's not the perfect language, it's not the it. But I have found that people often do better when there's some sort of springboard in front of them so they could see what it could potentially look like. So with that background, and I also took, PJ was also one of the, many governors have brought up the idea of having WSBA directly release their district emails to them, and they send out emails directly to their district members. So basically you can read PJ's proposal in there, and a lot of what PJ put in there, I just, again, kind of fleshed out. So when it says there was a disclaimer, I put what a potential disclaimer could look like. And I also put in there some of the other considerations that we would have to go through for such an option, which would be there's a policy to be changed, there's some data privacy consideration. I mean, there's just some things that I want us all to look at that are inherent with each consideration. I don't know how you want to go through each of them. Some of them, like I said, are much more involved. But I think they're all important. So I'll just kind of verbally run down the options and see what the preference is to go through them. But basically, here are the options I put in front of you. Number one was standard communication principles. I think what we have been grappling with a lot is what's the code of conduct, and what are the standards, and what are we holding each other responsible for, and what do we do in terms of a violation. So again, I put something together that builds on some of the language that you've already have in front of you, adding a code of conduct and some potential accountability language. That's option one. I think something like that is absolutely critical for all of the other options as well, because that's kind of like your baseline. That seems like what you've been grappling with the most. What is out of bounds? What is not out of bounds? How do we make a decision? Who gets to make the decision? And what do we do? And I know that's been a sticky wicket. Option two, this is something that was recommended to us through our outside counsel, and Julie can probably jump in as much as me here, but coming from a public background, it's always been the best practice when elected officials conduct business on accounts provided by the organization, and that's in terms of transparency, making sure we can produce records in a timely way, also for technical support and that sort of thing. So that's option two. Option three, and I think Kim was the one who said this, and I like it a lot, which would simply be for me and my team to take the emails that I put together, that I've been putting together, which is basically trying to be very factual rundown of what happened that we send out like on Monday, and divide them into districts. So Kim would get, this is, your greetings, district representative, your district governor is Kim, Hunter, whomever, and then putting their contact information. And at least that way they would be reminded and it would be framed in that context. Option 4 is the standard disclaimer, which I know we talked about, and I think that would be relatively easy. But just getting a standard disclaimer so that whenever governors send out something that is their own piece of communication, that would be on the top. And then we get to option 5, which you're all very interested in, which would be some options, some considerations that I think we'd want to take into account if we were to turn over member email addresses. We also have thought about the idea that another possibility would be providing governors with listservs, much like sections use and different committees, right? And that would be a way that the list would be curated for you, and you could send it out that way. And then C would be, we also wanted to talk about just non-email options for you, that my department in their outreach team really wants to emphasize ways to get you connected to the local bar and out and meeting with folks too. So that's kind of the whole slate. I know we don't have tons of time. There's a lot of stuff in here that we could go about talking about, looking at. What's everyone's preference?
So let's do it. Let's, instead of doing the preference thing,
okay.
I'm just going to kind of scrunch this down a little bit because of time. If there's something governors, that you really want to put out there for people to percolate on, knowing that this is not on for action, it's a good time to do that, and we can jump around. There's no reason. I don't think at this point we have to follow any sequential order. It's just these are topics on communication. This is clearly an area we have had some great struggles in, and so this is sort of the think tank period right now. Nothing is set in stone. There are no votes. Rajiv's got his arm up because this is something that he's going to care a lot about and make sure we're getting it better. So, Rajiv.
Just a point of order, I was trying to find the materials.
It's in the late materials.
Okay. On what page?
L90.
The
L89.
Oh,
yeah.
Right. I was only 3 pages.
Where is this stuff?
All right.
It's down in that area. One thing that I would ask, because I don't think it's a major leap, I would like to start sending out the official WSBA recap per district. It seemed like there was a lot of nods about that, and it would be a very easy thing to do. So,
all right.
Your update for District 4. Your District 4 governor is Dan Clark. Does that seem?
That's great.
All right.
Yeah.
Check.
Just to continue my thought.
Yep. Yeah. And then Carla's got her hand up. Yes.
I had been thinking about this because I do love, and I did love, and I think my constituents in 2nd District did love when I was doing my updates, and I really appreciate when governors take the time to synthesize their thoughts. Of course, we also want to balance it with our desire to get it out speedy, which I think Sarah talked about at our last time we discussed this as well. And so, ideally for me, I would love if the governors were sending them out to their districts, but I was thinking, just to let you know what I'd been thinking about over the last week, so I was like, we also want the speed. And if we didn't go down that path, I was thinking, well, maybe, but the Board of Governors should have some role into how forming the communications are going out. I was thinking, well, maybe I need to take a more active role in working with Sarah really quickly after the meeting to doing that. But it sounds like we have a lot of interesting options to discuss.
Can we get a mute on the phone, please? If you're on the phone, please mute. That was the mute button. Perfect. All right, so Rajiv, did you have something? Tom's got a hand up, and hey, Carla, can we jump the queue because I know Tom's got to leave. All right.
Thank you.
At some point, Tom.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just a question for Julie. Julie, right now I get emails from members in the district, and they'll ask a question. I'll respond to it. I'm not taking any efforts to retain those, and is that fine with you?
Could you repeat the first part of your question?
So I'll get emails from attorneys in District 10. They'll ask questions, and I'll respond to them. They're just one-on-one exchanges. I don't retain any of that stuff, and I just want to make sure that's fine.
Yes, things
far.
that never come. If you send it to me, or to anyone here, then it becomes a BART record. Things that you receive and that are your deal
Or that I send directly to a District 10
are
attorney.
currently not considered BART records. However, if those are used at a meeting, they become BART records.
Great. Thank you.
Again, if you're on the phone, we need you to press the mute button. It's spelled M-U-T-E, and it's on the phone. I know it's there. Don't pretend like it's not.
You can also press *6 if you don't have a mute button.
Oh, there's technology at work right there. All right, that's perfect. Carla.
Thank you, Bill. Without spending a lot of time, because I know our time is limited today, I just wanted to throw out that I appreciate the fact that we're talking about options. It's been one of my issues from the day that I was appointed to that I was frustrated I couldn't get a list of my constituents so that I could communicate with them. And I think it was a little frustrating to Sarah to have to keep telling me, sorry, I can't give it to you. She was very nice about it, though. But I'd definitely like to see that as a policy that we pass. I am not, and I like Rajiv's idea that if Sarah's going to try to quickly crank something out about this meeting, for example, that if she's sending it to the different districts, that the governor of that district gets a chance to weigh in on it, because otherwise I may send out my own, and I don't really, we're trying to make things, I realize, be relatively consistent. So I'd like to have an opportunity to comment on that. But I don't like the idea that we have to have the same message between all of us, or we're censured or sanctioned. I think that not only violates our free speech rights, but it is not consistent with a representative form of government. Congress doesn't coordinate all of their comments. Legislature doesn't. And I think we ought to be free to communicate with our members and our constituents as we individually see best in terms of what message we want to portray to them. So when we get closer to voting on that, I would certainly have more to say. But I just want to throw that out now. That's all, Bill.
Thanks, Carla. Do we have governors on the phone? We need to identify any governors on the phone. Okay. Thanks, Paul. Anyone else?
Your governor on the phone.
Thanks, Ethan. Brian, are you with us? Okay. Yeah. And then again, just for everybody on the phone, there's a failure to mute. We're getting some feedback, and if we could just everybody look to see, someone's not muted.
It's someone in a video arcade. It sounds like.
That seemed to do it. All right, next, more questions beyond Dan B.
You can't have too many cooks stirring the soup, but I think it's critical, and the board can decide who it wants it to be its representative, that there is some board vetting in these official communications, because we talk like lawyers, and sometimes...
Can you just speak up a little bit into the mic?
Sure. I said at some level there needs to be some board participation in these mass emails. Lawyers speak a certain language, we take words a certain way, and my impression over some of the communications in the past, although well-intended, may have missed a nuance or portrayed a nuance that wasn't actually there, and to a lawyer it makes a material difference, and it's ultimately our message. So I would suggest, and it shouldn't be overly complicated, but there needs to be some check and balance, so this board is exercising some role in its communications.
Okay. And I'll just hang up the phone here in a minute if it doesn't stop, because I'm not going to allow it to disrupt the meeting. So. PJ.
Yeah, I would just direct all of you to page 97 of the late materials. That's the draft policy or protocol that I put together, and I think it's a good starting point for a discussion of how we want to communicate with members as opposed to how WSBA staff wants to communicate with members.
All right.
Bill,
Yes.
I have one more thing I wanted to add, if I may.
You can add 2 or 3 if you'd like.
Oh, thank you. Well, what I wanted to say is what PJ just reminded me with his comment. It reminded me to bring up that there's been a concern on my part that sometimes the message that's sent out as an official WSBA communication may or may not exactly match what the majority of the board did. And I'm not throwing stones at anyone. I know it's always hard to keep track of a meeting and keep your notes going and try to write it up. But there's a little bit of a concern that I have, and so that brings up my point that Dan has said, that we need to have some input, because to me the majority of the board is the voice of the WSBA, and the staff should be carrying out that message. And I'm not in any way suggesting that that's intentionally not being done, but it's an important point.
Yes.
Okay. I don't disagree. I mean, I absolutely agree that the majority of the board is what the organization should put forth. One thing I think you guys are really going to need to grapple with is the practicality, because an individual governor does not represent the view of the board. The board vote does, and when the board acts as a whole, it does. And one of the challenges is when we're outside the meeting, you're not all gathered together and we're having a dialogue with a governor. And that is where the challenge lies. And, I think the authority to speak for the organization is articulated in the bylaws. It's vested in the president, it's vested in the board, and it's vested in the executive director. And so I just would urge you to not to disagree, just think through, practically speaking, how will it work when we're having a dialogue with one governor about how a communication is going to look. And I think that's some of what we've seen. People across the board, regardless of how they have felt about particular issues, have had concerns about what has gone out in other folks' communications.
Thanks, Tara. Alec.
Well, I'm just curious. Is a distinction to be made between a communication before an action is taken versus a governor's opinion and report on actions taken, where they may then give their opinion? Because in the latter, that is that governor's communication to their public or the constituencies, but there's not going to be another action because of it. Meaning, it's not then a group communication that happens. And I do think there's a distinction to be made between the two. In the first instance, if you're communicating and other governors are communicating, you're running right into that problem of having this meeting happening. In the other one, the meeting has happened, and you're reporting out what happened, including your opinion about what happened. I'm looking at Julie because I see a furrowed brow.
I think I'm just maybe confused about what you're saying. Are you expressing a concern that individual governors communicating with members, if each of them happened to communicate on the same issue, that might be a meeting? That's what I thought I heard you say. But what I thought Tara was talking about was sort of being careful about who is communicating. Is the communication coming from an individual governor, or is the individual governor communicating the action of the board? And I thought those were two kind of separate issues. So maybe you can help me, because maybe I got it all wrong.
Can I try and help?
Yes.
I agree. I think it's a very different thing if we're working on a governor's communication and it's clear that it's their communication. That I think is less of an issue. I mean, don't get me wrong. There have been challenges in navigating that. But I think what I heard a conversation about was the official recap that goes out, which I think is sort of the official statement of the WSBA I think we strive and will continue to strive to make that as neutral and accurate as possible. But that is where I think it will be challenging logistically if we're working with individual governors and not the entire board on what that says.
Okay. Carla?
Just as a follow-up, I agree with what Tara just said, and I think that makes some sense, that it's hard, it's going to be difficult to, if Sarah's trying to tailor a communication to my district and she talks with me, is my take on what the board did different than, Russell's take or Kyle's take or Kim's take, and that's a fair point. I think what Alec was saying, and I think, not to shock you, Alec, I may agree with you, is that, wait, do you want me to put that in writing? What I think he's saying, if I heard him right, is that there's a difference between, let's just take this meeting as an example, us going back to our constituents and saying, we talked about these things, we didn't take any action. If you have any input, would you get it to us, because we're going to be talking about it again in September, and here's some concerns that I have, or whatever, versus us reporting the board voted to do X, and this is what the majority voted for. I personally think it was a great decision, or I personally think it was a terrible decision, or I didn't really care one way or the other. I was sleeping through the vote. But that seems, isn't that what you were saying, Alec? There's a difference in how we communicate when we're telling people something's going to happen versus when it's actually occurred.
Well, there's also the difference between the official report. So I don't have an issue with the official report being one that is consistently and uniformly communicated. But after that report is given, I still have the right to give my opinion regarding the report, the actions taken, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think Carla's nodding. I agree. And also, I still want you all to think about, there still also have been concerns about each other's communications, even when they are each other's viewpoints. And so, it's up to you. Do you want to agree that there are certain standards that you want each other to abide by, or do you feel comfortable letting people use their own judgment in how they're going to approach it? And if you do want some sort of standard, who do you want to enforce that? Because I can tell you that for Sarah and Julie and I, it is a uncomfortable position, to say the least, to try to be navigating that.
Finger in the air. PJ.
And Bill, can I chime in? This is Paul.
Right after PJ.
In my view, communications by an individual governor, as I outlined at page 97, should not be subject to a lot of rules. If somebody crosses the line, I think it's the Board of Governors that should deal with it. I don't think that we should ask the staff to have to deal with it, or the executive director. In terms of communications that go out from WSBA as opposed to an individual governor, I trust those will be accurate, and that the majority of the board will feel comfortable. And if we get to a point where that's not going on, everybody will hear about it.
All right, Paul, I'll say what I want when I want, Swiggle. You're up, buddy.
Thank you. It's a little bit hard to hear, so hopefully you can hear me fine. And I think I just heard PJ say that he does not want governor communications to be hamstrung by a bunch of rules or standards. I agree with that position. That is my position, is that governors should be able to communicate freely with their constituents. I think anything else is interfering with political speech and, attempting to control the narrative in ways that is not healthy. So that's my position. I don't see any need for control over governors' communications to their constituents.
Thanks, Paul. And Carla had her hand up. Before I go back to you, Carla, any other hands in the air here? Remember, we Will you just hold your thought for a sec, because we're going to go Chris and Russell, and okay, we'll see where if we come back there. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to raise an issue that I've struggled with in the entire period of time that I've been on the board, and that is the perception that any one person or section or entity speaking is the bar speaking. And we've really struggled with this regarding the section's ability to communicate with the legislature. And what we've been told by legislators themselves is when, they can't tell the difference between a section talking and the bar talking. And I think that's true with individual governor messages also, that the membership can't, I know they're smart people, but I think legislators are smart people too in the main. And, the reality is they can't draw that line. And so for us to say, oh, well, that's just an individual governor speaking, they're not speaking for the bar, I think we're assuming an ability to make a distinction that I don't think our members can make. And it's not just with individual governor communication, it's sort of with everything we do.
Yeah, okay. Russell?
I agree with what Chris just said. I also agree that it's very important to not restrict a governor's ability to communicate with their district or with whatever group they're representing. And maybe one way to do it is in the email there's a very clear heading that says, recap, and then, governor reserves take. And then there's you can write a little paragraph there. And that your take shouldn't be formally policed in any way, but I would just have an informal request that try and do it respectfully. Try and elevate the WSBA to a high, noble position. Try to treat fellow governors with respect. Try and project an image of a positive image of our organization, as opposed to a negative image. We talked a little bit about reputation in the retreat. Part of the problem with our reputation is a lot of the infighting here. And I get that part of the infighting is part of the benefit of the organization. I mean, obviously, if this were just a homogenous group, that wouldn't be good. And we need to have a dialogue. But in these emails that just sort of throw the WSBA under the bus and throw governors under the bus, I guess I don't think you should be prohibited from doing that, but I would just ask us to not do that and ask us to try and do so in a positive way. And I think you can communicate a disagreement with a vote without tearing down people.
Good points. Sarah?
So can I ask,
yes.
And I know we can't violate OPMA this way, but maybe everyone could take a read, because I'm trying to tell you how we tried to dovetail. When PJ is pointing you to his proposal, what I'm saying is I've taken PJ's proposal and told you what I believe might go into every single one of those points he said, because some of them are not as easy as just give everybody the email addresses. Email addresses change constantly. We have opt-in, opt-out. We have a policy against it. So maybe if you all read, and to your point, Russell, I think what we're at a very minimum asking for is a code of conduct, so that we can look at each other and say, I think you did not do that. So, for instance, if you read about the code of conduct, and I know it's not the right language, but, present accurate information that's consistent with organizational records and data. Present the majority decision of the board fairly and without contempt. This also might include explaining the reasoning while expressing why you think different, right? So there's a lot of things in there. I think what we're basically struggling with is we want everyone to be able to express their viewpoints, but we don't like how we've been doing it to each other. And I think it is a reputation management problem. So what I've done is I've put together, things that layer into there. You asked for a disclaimer, I put a disclaimer in there. So I think maybe a lot of the pieces are in there leading up to this idea. If you would like to have those email addresses, there's some steps and processes we need to go through, but I think the most foundational piece is this code of conduct. I don't think we're going to get it through today. Maybe if you all read through and you can send me edits or thoughts or proposals and it can come back again. But I do think if we can look at each other and say, this is what we agree to, we're much better able to look at, to communicate the ways that don't impinge on your own expression, but also that support us moving forward in a positive way.
Thank you. And we've got, and just for the record, I don't want PJ to have my email as a member. As a member, I'm just speaking only as a member, not as the president. All right, Ethan, was that you on the phone?
Yeah, just a quick question. I think you referenced some emails that were throwing WSBA under the bus. Can you give us some examples of what you're referring to?
My preference is not to call out individual governors, but I think that as lawyers and adults that we have an understanding of what's a respectful communication and what's a disrespectful communication. And there's going to be some disagreement on that. And I think a code of conduct is going to need to have a wide variety of a wide latitude in interpretation, but a baseline for conduct. And that's, I think that's part of Sarah's proposal, or PJ and Sarah's proposal. And I know I'm not really answering your question, but I think we can all have an understanding of what elevates the WSBA and what tears the WSBA down.
Okay, we're short on time. I want to just finish with this parting comment, and it's food for thought. Please, I think what Sarah and what Russell are both touching upon when they talk about the reputation of the organization is vitally important. And the reason I say that is not because I think it, or I've had some dream about it. It's because I've actually gone out and I've talked to a lot of members. And our reputation isn't really good right now, and it needs to get better. And part of where I saw the reputation starting to slip here a few years ago is that we did start butting heads, and I've been the biggest head butter, if you will, over these email communications, and really sensed that we weren't speaking in a respectful way. We were being derogatory toward some folks and derogatory toward the organization, and we disagreed on that, and that created a lot of difficulty internally. So my hope is this, that as you continue to think about this, you would put at the forefront of your mind the reputation not of ourselves, but this organization, and remember, you are, in a sense, the face of the organization, and it matters to members. When they get mixed communication, they are not only confused, but they're deeply troubled by some of the comments they hear, and they don't really have a way to get clarification other than to say, what is going on? So please keep that in mind. The other thing, and this is totally food for thought, is this idea that, and you've all heard it before, I've never really aspired to this idea that I represent constituents, okay? I certainly have a preference for people that I love dearly in the 4th Congressional District. I call it a preference. But the reality is, I and you represent all of the membership. All of the membership. And I only know that because if you go out and you talk to people in places like Newport or Davenport or Vancouver or Seattle or everywhere in between, they don't look at you and go, I'm your constituent as much as you are the representative of the organization. So I would just at least think about that. You're much bigger than that. You're much bigger than a congressional district. You get elected by congressional districts. Undisputed fact, you do. But it's not just those people. It is the state of this entire organization, all of the members, and they really look to you as their governors. So the respect issue, who do you represent? A couple of things to ponder, and that's it. We'll move forward. Okay.